Corporate crimes, white-collar crimes. Corporate crimes, white-collar crimes, are often considered nonviolent in the sense that they don't involve direct physical harm to individuals. Instead, these crimes typically involve deceit, fraud, or other forms of white-collar misconduct committed by individuals or organizations within the business sector. Some reasons why corporate crimes are characterized as non-violent include financial manipulation. Many corporate crimes involve financial manipulation, such as embezzlement, insider trading, or accounting fraud. While these actions can have severe economic consequences, they don't necessarily result in physical harm to individuals. Deceptive practices. Corporate crimes often revolve around deceptive practices such as false advertising, product misrepresentation, or misleading financial reporting. While these actions can harm individuals economically, they don't involve direct physical force. Regulatory violations. Corporate crimes may include violations of regulations or laws governing business practices. These can range from environmental violations to antitrust violations. While these actions may have broad societal implications, they are not violent in the traditional sense. Cybercrime. With increasing reliance on digital technologies, corporate crimes often involve cybercrimes such as hacking, data breaches, and intellectual property theft. While these activities can cause significant harm, they are not physically violent. Corporate crimes or white-collar crimes are financially motivated crimes. These crimes are considered nonviolent crimes. White-collar or corporate crimes consist of and include antitrust violations, arson for profit, bank fraud, bankruptcy fraud, bribery, check fraud, computer-related crime, consumer fraud, copyright infringement, corporate crimes, counterfeiting, coupon fraud, credit card fraud, cyber crime, economic espionage, embezzlement, employee theft, environmental law, false claims, financial fraud, forgery, fraud, government healthcare fraud, identity theft, insider trading, insurance fraud, internet fraud, kickbacks, labor racketeering, mail fraud, medical fraud, money laundering, telemarketing fraud, Ponzi schemes, public corruption, securities fraud, tax evasion, theft offenses, trade secret theft, and violations of environmental laws. Violent crimes consist of and include homicide, murder, assault, manslaughter, sexual assault, rape, robbery, kidnapping, and extortion. And there is a significant discrepancy between the mean, average, and the median, middle, between violent crimes and nonviolent white-collar crime. There is a 378% and a 469% increase in sentences for violent crimes versus white-collar crimes. Prison sentence justice scale. White-collar crime, 1%. Sociopaths preferred crimes, average 18 months, versus violent crimes, which average 7.5 years. White-collar crimes, financial crimes, are the crimes of choice for the 1% sociopaths. White-collar crimes have been labeled as non-violent crimes. The 1% sociopaths use the label non-violent crimes to convince the 99%ers that these white-collar crimes are less severe, less devastating, and less shattering than violent crimes. Therefore, white-collar crimes, punishments, and sentences should be considerably less than that of violent crimes. This sounds reasonable at first glance. Preventing white-collar crime. The average lifetime earnings for a family is $2,430,188. If that family has been defrauded of that amount of money, the family would be completely devastated, shattered, and traumatized, suffering from the inability to buy food, clothes, and pay for shelter. Without food, shelter, and clothes, this defrauded family dies and has been killed by the 1% sociopath defrauder. Generally speaking, the 1% sociopaths spread their financial fraud crimes over many families. These families lose their savings, but still can earn money for food, clothes, and shelter. These white-collar crimes should be judged on their cumulative total effect and not on their individual impact on each family. A white-collar crime that defrauds the average lifetime earnings of a single family has a cumulative, devastating impact and should receive a corresponding prison sentence. A white-collar sentence for the crime of defrauding the equivalent of a family's lifetime earnings should receive a minimum sentence of life in prison. This may seem like a harsh sentence. This would act as a white-collar crime deterrent for the 1% sociopaths. The Supreme Court has acknowledged the federal sentencing guidelines to be only advisory, suggested, and optional rather than mandatory, binding, required, and obligatory. This implies that the judges could sentence white-collar criminals to longer and longer prison sentences and recommend that the 1% sociopaths criminals are placed in maximum security prisons. The deterrence of lengthy prison sentences and of being placed in prisons with rapists and murderers will give cause and pause to the 1% sociopaths before committing and engaging in their white-collar crimes. The rest of my life in prison, 1% sociopath in jail. Why did I defraud the seniors, the elderly, and the old? I hope no one finds me attractive. A robber of a gas station who steals $250 receives a 25-year prison sentence. A white-collar criminal who defrauds thousands of $2.5 million gets a 1-year prison sentence. For the 1% sociopaths, 1 year in jail is not a deterrent to committing the $2.5 million criminal fraud, but a life sentence is a deterrent and will prevent many white-collar criminals from engaging in financial fraud. The prosecution of white-collar crimes is 300% less likely than violent crimes. The estimate of cost of white-collar crimes is between $300 billion and $1.4 trillion per year. This represents a 21 to 1,000 times greater than the $14 billion cost of violent crimes. The cost of white-collar crimes includes the ripple or wave effect of consumer price increases, corporate bankruptcies, corporate debts not paid, court costs, environmental damages, falling stock prices, jail costs, job losses from the bankrupt corporations and from upstream suppliers, lost jobs, lost savings, stockholders' loss of equity value, and vanquished and lost employee retirements The total cost of all American bank robberies in the last 100 years is less than the cost of a single corrupt savings and loan, according to Rozoff, Pontel, and Tillman. Law enforcement resources are misdirected toward violent crime rather than the 1% sociopaths' white-collar crime. HSBC Bank, who laundered money for Mexican drug lords and provided funding to terrorists, paid a fine of $2 billion. $2 billion is the equivalent of just 1 month's HSBC's profit. This is not much of a deterrent. Pfizer committed the following white-collar crimes: illegal marketing, bribing doctors, and other white-collar crimes. For each of these white-collar crimes, Pfizer paid a fine and pledged to change. This deferred prosecution agreement did not deter, discourage, and frighten Pfizer from committing future white-collar crimes. Criminal prosecution of white-collar crimes is at an all-time low. The following FBI white-collar criminal prosecution shows that there has been a steady decline in the number of cases prosecuted, regardless of whether the president was Democratic or Republican. And note that in 2008, Great Recession was one of the lowest prosecution of white-collar crimes, when this had a devastating effect on the United States and the world. Through just corporate fines, federal prosecutors have granted immunity to the 1% sociopaths who commit white-collar crimes. Fines and penalties are not a deterrent to white-collar criminals. Fines are an incentive, encouragement, and motivation for the 1% sociopaths to commit more white-collar crimes. Fines are considered the cost of doing business by the 1% sociopaths. Before 1990s, prosecutors indicted executives who committed the white-collar crimes. White-collar criminal executives were treated in the same manner as mobsters. In the 1980s, 900 people were prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced for committing white-collar crimes in the savings and loan crisis. The cost of the savings and loan crisis exceeded $160 million. Why was there just one prosecution for the 2008 Great Recession, which cost $21 trillion? The 1% sociopaths 2008 Great Recession mortgage crisis cost the 99%ers $21 trillion. The Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission determined that the cause of the 2008 Great Recession was criminal, predatory, and fraudulent practices of banks and other mortgage lending corporations. No banks or senior executives were prosecuted. Jesse Eisinger, the author of The Chicken Shit Club, Why the Justice Department Fails to Prosecute Executives, listed the following potential criminal financial institutions: Bank of America, Citigroup, AIG, Countrywide, Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, and Washington Mutual. Dozens of white-collar criminal cases were referred by the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission for prosecution. There were no arrests, no indictments, no trials, and no jail time. The 2008 Great Recession mortgage crisis economic damages are 131 times larger than the 1980s savings and loan loan crisis, $21 trillion as compared to $160 billion. This implies, suggests, and infers that there should have been thousands of people prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced for committing white-collar crimes in the 2008 Great Recession mortgage crisis. No one was arrested, indicted, tried, and convicted for the 2008 Great Recession mortgage crisis. This is the most significant financial fraud and financial theft from the 99 percenters since 1929's stock market crash in this century. In 2013, Eric Holder, then the Attorney General, stated, "I am concerned that the size of some of these institutions becomes so large that it does become difficult for us to prosecute them when we are hit with indications that if you do prosecute, if you do bring a criminal charge, it will have a negative impact on the national economy and perhaps even the world economy." I think that is a function of the fact that some of these institutions have become too large. The banks and corporations cannot commit white-collar crimes in the absence of people. Banks and corporations need executives, employees, and other people to initiate and commit white-collar crimes. Prosecution of these individuals within an organization, rather than just fining a corporation, will have a chilling effect on the 1% sociopaths' desire to engage in white-collar crimes. Eric Holder is correct that charging an organization with criminal charges could have adverse effects causing collateral damage to innocent individuals. Prosecuting individuals within an organization would only affect those white-collar criminals with the minor inconvenience of hiring non-criminal replacements. White-collar criminal executives, employees, and other people within an organization are quickly replaced by law-abiding executives, employees, and other people. The lack of prosecution of these white-collar criminals negatively affects law-abiding corporations' ability to compete fairly. 2008 Great Recession mortgage crisis, 1% sociopaths, 3.1 million home foreclosures. Give me all the money. I only have $25. Amateur, far easier to defraud 99 percenters. Jail is for the 99 percenters, not for us, the 1% sociopaths, white-collar criminals. 99 percenters, home sweet home. All I did was steal $25. Violent crimes are easier to understand, more sensational, and more dramatic than white-collar crimes. Violent crimes receive a disproportionate and lopsided amount of media coverage: TV, internet, radio, newspapers, and magazines. Media ratings increase with the reporting of violent crimes. News stations have a theme or saying, "If it bleeds, it lead." This implies that lead stories should be violent crimes such as murder, drunk driving, accidents resulting in death, shootings, stabbings, sexual assaults, etc. The public's twisted and skewed belief and perception is that crime rates and the impact of violent crimes is substantially higher than that of white-collar crimes. For the reason of low and lack of enforcement of white-collar crimes and the 1% sociopaths' wealth, the 1% sociopaths are more likely than not to escape punishments for their crimes than the 99 percenters. 1% sociopaths' wealth and connections give them a significant advantage to avoid prosecutions, convictions, and lengthy prison sentences over the 99 percenters.